Welcome to Coach Bennett's podcast, where every run has a purpose, where kindness is hardcore, where this is about running, and this is not about running, where every starting line is a finish line in disguise, where rambling still gets you where you need to be, where pineapple will never ruin your pizza, and the sodas, adult and not adult kind, are always cold, and where there is room on the starting line for everybody. I'm Coach Bennett. Thank you for letting me be a part of your day. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of Coach Bennett's podcast. This is episode 87, Metrics That Matter. That's right, that is the title of episode 87, Metrics That Matter. You heard me right, nerds. We're talking metrics, and I know that's got a lot of runners out there super happy. And here's the thing. You know I talk about measuring success as many ways as you can, and that means that I'm asking you to measure success in ways that maybe are a little bit tough to put a number on, right? You know, not everything you can say, well, that was a 32 last week and it's a 41 this week, which means I'm better. Not everything can have a number associated to it, but metrics don't have to have numbers associated with them. Oh, no. And just to make sure I wasn't saying something that, wasn't true, I looked up the definition for metric, and I'm going to tell you what it is. It's a noun. It's a system or standard of measurement used to compare or track performance. So that's all it is. It doesn't say you need to use a number to measure it. I think it helps sometimes. So many of the metrics I'm going to be bringing up today involve numbers, but some of them don't. Anyway, the purpose of this really is to go over some of the things that I think we all hear about, that we all kind of measure either initially or eventually in our journey in running. And then there's some of those metrics that, like I said, they're a little bit harder to measure by number, but they sure are easy to measure. And they can be a great metric for success or a great metric for failure. Because that's really one of the things that these numbers help with. Did we succeed? Did we fail? Are we heading in the right direction? Are we going in the wrong direction? Are we progressing? Are we regressing? The other thing I want us to do here, though, is I also want us to understand what some of these metrics really mean. Because a lot of times we can be looking at them the wrong way, or we can be hearing about them and being told the wrong things about them. And if we're not understanding what they're actually measuring, well, there's a good chance we're not going to be taking the lessons, the learnings from those metrics like we should. We're not going to get the benefits from them that we could. And obviously, some of these metrics I'm bringing up because we can distort them. And by distort, I mean we can be putting too much weight on them. We can give them too much control, too much power, too much sway over how we feel about our running, how we feel about ourselves. So that's the purpose of this. I think this is going to be a great episode. I'm super excited to talk about it. And let's just jump right in to one of the metrics that I think is pretty standard because it's something that initially gets brought up in a first conversation I have with runners all the time. They'll tell me how many days a week they want to run. And when they're telling me how many days a week they want to run, they're telling me so much. Right off the bat, I can hear, right off the bat, I know how much they believe they can do, how much time they're going to be able to give to their running. But also, I can also tell what they consider a success will be. And success at this stage early on, it may be legitimate, it may be illegitimate. Because really, what's the difference in success between 3 days a week running and 4 days a week running? Well, unless you're asking some follow-up, questions here, like, what do you have the ability to do? Well, I have the ability to run 4 days a week, but I'm shooting for 3 because I want to succeed and I don't want to set myself up for failure. And I think 4 is the max I could do, or 5 is the max I can do. I'm shooting for 3 because I want some buffer, and it suddenly isn't about how much are they running each week. It's about whether or not they can check a box that I did the amount that I said I was going to do. So it's always good, and I'm using this as the first example for a couple of reasons. Obviously, the first reason is it gets brought up all the time. People will use how many days a week they go for a run as a metric of success, as a measurement of how much they're progressing and whether or not their running is a success. Keep in mind, this is a very dangerous thing to do, but it can also be a very inspirational, motivational thing to do. And I'll touch on both in just a moment. But when we say we want to run X days a week, just remember it's an arbitrary number that we're choosing. A lot of times it has very little to do with how much fitness we want to gain, how fast we want to get, how it fits into a training plan, whether we think those amount of days will allow us to have the required or the most beneficial diversity in training that we would like during the course of a week. It's usually just, I think 3 days a week will make me feel like a success, because maybe I'm only running 2 days a week, or maybe I'm not running at all. That's just something to think about right off the bat, because all of these metrics, when we use them to measure success, if it's not progression that they're measuring, then it's usually something arbitrary in our mind that we're deciding equates with success. So I'm bringing that up now because I just want you to think about your own running. You probably have a set goal or kind of a loosey-goosey goal in your mind of each week, I'd like to run this many runs, this many days. Okay, I'm just challenging you to ask yourself why. Is it because that's the max amount of days you can run considering your schedule? Is it the amount of runs you need to do in a given week to progress towards a place or a certain goal you have in a certain amount of time? Where is this number coming from? Why is it 2 days a week, 4 days a week, 6 days a week? Why are you choosing that number? And then what I want you to do is ask yourself, if you don't hit the number in a given week, is that not hitting the metric a sign of failure? Is it proof of coming up short? Do you punish yourself emotionally, mindfully, when you don't hit the set metric you have for days running? Just something to think about, because from a coaching perspective, it's not so much did you miss days? It's have we lost momentum? Have we taken steps backward from not running on certain days? Just like we also will measure the same things. Have we taken steps backward? Have we lost momentum by running on certain days? I bring that up because that gets lost so many times on athletes. We think we're only measuring success and progress based on the activity of running. Coaches will also be looking at recovery, rest, healing, and days off for signs of progression. We believe you can get better on days you don't run, especially on days you shouldn't run. So I just want you to take some time before we move along, or come back to this after the podcast, and ask yourself if you're using days a week as a metric to measure the success of your running. Why and how are you looking at those numbers at the end of each week or the end of a month? And how are you correlating that with your progression? Or are you punishing yourself? Are you actually taking steps back because you're looking at certain days off as setbacks to your training? And let me just have you pause there again. I know there's all these pauses here, but what I want you to do is think about how maybe you are making a day off a negative rather than something neutral or a positive. Okay? So, one of the metrics that matter is how many days a week you're running. How much it matters and in what way it matters obviously is going to be dependent on you. Another metric that we look at is minutes. That's a standard metric that we look at on most runs. In fact, I would say early in an athlete's journey in running, it should be minutes instead of meters or miles. You should be focusing on the time you're spending running rather than the distance, because that's something universal that we can kind of attach ourselves to from a coaching perspective when we're trying to initiate someone into the sport. So when we go out on day one, let's say when I was coaching high school, it may be we're going to go out for a 15-minute run. Now, you could have a group of athletes at all different stages of fitness or expertise, experience in this sport. But I knew that 15 minutes was going to be 15 minutes for everybody. And if I gave a certain effort to that, I knew that everyone was going to have a 15-minute easy run, because I would tell everyone, base it on effort, not on your pace, which sometimes doesn't equate with the effort, and don't push, don't stress. Now, if everyone follows these rules, we're all having a 15-minute recovery run. We're all having a 15-minute easy run. And more importantly, at the end, I had a team that felt like they had done the same work. Now, granted, not everyone is at the same fitness level. Not everyone has the same amount of expertise that coincides with their experience in this sport. So I had some athletes that were obviously running different distances over those durations. But what I wanted was everyone to be able to leave knowing they did a 15-minute easy run. That's why I love minutes as a metric, right? And if you, again, go back to that definition, what is a metric? A metric's just a system or standard of measurement used to compare or track performance. Okay, early on, it's great when you're just starting running or starting to run again or starting back after sickness, injury, anything like that, to be able to measure some progression, right? I mean, that's one of the things that is just so extraordinary about our sport. There are so many different ways to measure progression. The duration that you're running is a big one, and it's something that's universal. Like I said, distance, very different. It could take someone that has a good friend that is also a runner half the time to run a 10K as their friend. So when they go out and run a 10K and someone's doing it in 40 minutes and somebody's doing it in 80 minutes, that's a dramatic difference. Dramatic difference. What I'd rather do is get people together early on to be able to share in a metric like duration. And it's something that we look at. But again, that metric doesn't always tell the whole story. Like I mentioned, the two athletes, it might be at different fitness levels or experience levels. 15 minutes for one athlete may be a glorified warm-up. But for another athlete, it could be a long run. The one thing they have in common, obviously, is the duration. The effort that can take place during the duration can change what the purpose of that duration was, but also how much recovery is needed afterwards. The emotional aspect of a 15-minute race effort is very different than the emotional aspect of a 15-minute warm-up. So just remember, when you're using a metric like duration, you have to go deeper. You can't just say, well, this week I ran 100 minutes, and that's great because last week I ran 80. You have to go deeper, because you could say, I only went 80 this week, and last week I went 100. But this week you did 2 speed runs, and those speed runs obviously did not have the volume of duration as some of your easy runs, but the intensity was much higher. So the reason why you had less minutes was because of the type of runs you did and the intensity of the running you did. So it doesn't make sense if you're trying to measure progression, movement forward, right? Increases in fitness or confidence, and look at 80 minutes and say, well, that's 20 minutes less than last week. This week is not as good because it's not more. Well, it's more intense, it's more diverse in the type of running that you're doing. My point here is duration is another metric that is good to use, can be valuable to use when you're trying to measure progression, but it doesn't always tell the whole story. I think you're going to find a theme here that numbers are really good at measuring certain things. They're just not very good at telling the story behind those numbers. If you've done guided runs with me, you've heard me say before, that if all you're doing to measure success is how fast or how far, you're never going to go as fast or as far as you could. Because the only thing distance and duration tells you is how long and how far. What you did during those minutes, meters, and miles, how you did those things during those minutes, meters, and miles, what you overcame, what you struggled with, what you broke through during those minutes, meters, and miles. That's going to be a bigger indicator of progression than just minutes, meters, and miles, which leads me to meters and miles. Yeah, not duration. We're talking distance. This is another OG classic, first Hall of Fame class inductee to the Running Metric Hall of Fame. Did I say Hall of Fame twice? All right, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's the Hall of Fame. It should be mentioned multiple times. The point is, distance, duration, those are the two classics. And distance, a lot of times, is what's focused on early. And like I mentioned, if you're coming back from injury or if you're new to the sport, distance should come after duration. Begin by adding duration to your runs. So if you want to progress, don't worry about progressing by Ks or miles. Early on, start with minutes. Then you can do the meters and the miles. Later on, once you kind of have like a foundation of runs, because here's the thing, if you run a certain amount of minutes and you have a GPS watch or you really understand your neighborhood or, there's markers out there on the trail, you know how far you ran. You're going to know the distance. Give yourself some time to figure out the distance. I just came up with that. That's a great line. Give yourself some time to figure out your distances. Yeah, baby, that's a good one. The point here, and what I mean by that is give yourself a couple of weeks running by minutes, and then you can start sprinkling in runs based on distance. Look back at that running log, that running journal, that running diary you have, and get a better handle for, when I go for 20 minutes, it's usually about 2 miles. Or when I go for 30 minutes, it's usually about 5K. Whatever, it doesn't matter. You can personalize the numbers yourself. I'm just throwing things out there. So if you've been going for a couple 25, 30, 35-minute runs, maybe shift that point of view of what you're doing, because you're going to be seeing your run from a slightly different angle when you move from a duration-based run to a distance-based run, which, again, is a good thing. You want diversity in your training. It doesn't just mean speed runs, long runs, easy runs. It also means distance-based runs and duration-based runs. So once you've been doing duration-based runs for long enough where you've got a good handle of how far you go during that time, well, then switch it and say, instead of going for about 30 minutes, which is about 5K, I'm going to go for a 5K. And you start measuring things in a slightly different way. You start clicking off the Ks instead of 5 and 10-minute intervals. When you do 5 miles or 8K, you start splitting off half miles and miles as opposed to, I'm 6 minutes in, I'm 12 minutes in, I'm 18 minutes in, so on and so forth. It's just a different way of looking at the same thing. And it feels differently. If you usually take 30 minutes to go for a 5K run, a 30-minute run feels different than a 5K run. I don't know why, it just does. But I think that's a good thing. You're working out different vibes. You're working out different ways of looking at the same thing. You're keeping an open mind to how the same experience repeated becomes a different experience, because you can't ever repeat the same experience, right? Now, associated with distance and duration is the other most popular metric, which is pace. And I like to equate pace with effort. Okay, so you'll hear me, if you've done runs with me before, I may say, hey, we're going to be doing an easy run today. We're going to be starting out kind of like a 3 out of a 10 effort. We're going to be working up to like a 5 out of 10 effort. Now, all of this hopefully makes sense for people. And if it doesn't, I'll suddenly use words. I'll say, what we want to do is we want to feel easy, relaxed, and comfortable. That's what we want to feel. And it makes even more sense when you start bringing in other paces, other efforts, like 5K race pace. 5K race pace is pretty quick. It's like a high 7, 8 out of 10 effort, right? You're feeling strong and fast, in control. That's legit. Now, 10K pace is strong and controlled, isn't it? Yeah, you feel powerful when you're running 10K pace, but it's not 8 out of 10. It's not a high 7 out of 10. It's probably like a 6, a low 6 out of 10. So it's less effort because you're running for longer. Now, mile pace or 1500 pace, that's like a 9 out of 10. That is fast and fun and straight up nasty. You know what I mean? And it's a greater effort than 5K pace and 10K pace. So these paces, these numbers that you're going to see, this pace per K, this pace per mile, they're associated with efforts that you can put into words or you can put into numbers on a scale. I like to use out of 10. Or you can associate them with different race paces. So there's different ways of understanding, of feeling these metrics of pace. But again, context is important. Running 100 meters at your mile pace and doing 16 of them with a minute recovery in between. Well, yeah, you did a mile at mile pace, but that's much easier than doing 1 mile at mile pace in a race that's a mile long, isn't it? Of course it is. So just remember that this is another thing you've got to dive deeper on. You spent time running at mile pace. That's wonderful. But how much time, how much distance did you spend running at mile pace? How much recovery did you spend between those efforts? These are those moments where you got to dig a little bit deeper. Because when we measure our success at the end of the week, when we look at our metrics, too often we don't look close enough. We breeze over them. We see that the distance is lower than last week, or the durations are lower than last week, or the efforts are greater when it comes to pace. The paces are faster, but we don't look and see, well, what exactly did we do? So we may be very, very tired at the end of the week because we spent time running at mile pace. But how did we run that mile pace? What was the breakdown? Because maybe it's not the efforts associated with running those paces that is why you are so tired. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's something that has nothing to do with running. So once again, these metrics are great ways to measure certain things, but they're never going to tell you the whole story. And yes, I'm going to be saying that throughout this episode. So as we start clicking off more and more metrics, what you're going to realize is that these metrics are really good. They give you great insights, but on a standalone basis, they don't tell you too much, okay? You're going to need other metrics. You're going to need things that maybe are outside of the metrics as well to give context to the metrics, right? Moving on. Here's one that's been super popular over the last couple of years. Cadence. That's right. I get lots of people asking me about cadence, and I give them the same answer every single time. I'll tell them, well, first and foremost, cadence is really just measuring how many steps you're taking in a minute while you're running. That's it, right? That's the basic definition. But okay, well, what does that tell you? Well, it depends. I mean, ideally what cadence is going to tell you is how efficiently you're running. But any type of measurement that says it's going to tell you how fit you are or how efficient you are as a runner or how strong you are as a runner, you got to take all that with a grain of salt. I mean, I'm going to just tell you right off the bat, I've never, ever heard a coach yell out anything about cadence at a workout, ever. Now, that doesn't mean coaches aren't paying attention to cadence. We are, we're just not paying attention to it the way that, magazines or articles right now are telling you we're paying attention to it. And part of the reason why it's all over the place is because it's a metric in a lot of apps and on a lot of smartwatches. So it's there and people look at it and there isn't much detail about what it's telling you other than, hey, here's a number. So then you Google it and it says you should be running 180 cadence. And it's like, well, when? When should I be running 180 cadence? And what do you mean me specifically? I should be running 180 steps per minute? At what pace? On what terrain? What type of a run? Does it matter how tall I am? What kind of fitness I'm in? These are things that absolutely fundamentally matter. So when you're Googling what my cadence should be and you're not at 180, don't panic, okay? Don't panic. I was looking back before I started recording this podcast, and in my last 2 months, because that's as far as I wanted to go back, I have not had an average of 180 for any of my runs. My average has been between 148 and 168. That's been my average cadence over the last 2 months on my runs. The range has been between 148 and 168. Okay, now I've run hilly runs, I've run on the beach, I've run on the roads, I've done some speed workouts. It's been between 148 and 168. That's been my range. Some of this has to do with the fitness I've got going on right now. Some of this has to do, like I said, with the terrain. I do hilly runs. My cadence on a hilly run that has a lot of uphills is not going to be that high. I'm also doing predominantly recovery runs. So I'm not trying to run super fast. I will tell you this. When I think about cadence, I'm not even really thinking about cadence. I'm thinking about, am I starting to run sluggish? Am I starting to excessively land on my heels? When I'm getting fatigued, am I starting to overstride? That's going to diminish the number of steps I'm taking in a given minute. That's going to make me less efficient. That's what I'm concerned about. So it's not so much a specific number I'm concerned about. It's a type of way I begin to run that I get concerned about. What I get concerned about is running inefficiently, running sluggishly. And when I run that way, inefficiently, landing excessively on my heels, which basically is pounding the brakes every time I step on the gas. It's like brake, gas, brake, gas, brake, gas. Not a fun way to run. When I run like that, what I'm really doing is artificially slowing myself down. It's a lot of times because I'm starting to let my form break down. I'm starting to lose focus. It can also be from fatigue, but when I'm out there on a recovery run, more often than not, it's a sign of me losing focus and really maybe boredom, daydreaming a little bit beyond what is good for my running, because daydreaming out there on the run is one of the best parts of the run. But I do check in with myself, and it's usually just a quick form check that's going to get me back to running better and having a more efficient cadence. So I'm not concerned about the number. I will tell you this, I've yet to finish a run in my life and look for cadence. Haven't done it. Which is why it was so interesting to me to look before this podcast and see what my cadence was. But that doesn't diminish what the cadence can tell you. It can tell you you're starting to let your form break down. You're starting to land excessively on your heels, which will slow you down, but also is going to put extra strain on your body, which could lead to extra fatigue and or eventually injury. It could show you that you're losing focus out there on the run. So there's a number of things that cadence can be used for. But the first thing you need to take into account is what your average, your proper, your normal cadence is. You have to have a benchmark. You can't just do a run and see that it's 152 and think it's supposed to be 180, okay? Because here's the thing. You could have a cadence of 185 and it should be 175. Your stride's too short, you're taking too many steps, so all of the things that, you read about that, well, you're really efficient, you have less time on the ground, all that stuff. Well, you know what? You're also inefficiently running because you're taking too many steps. I could take 400 steps a minute probably if I got my feet down fast enough. It doesn't mean I'm going to be moving quickly. It doesn't mean I'm going to be running efficiently. So remember, every single metric doesn't tell you the whole story. It just tells you something. You just need to spend a little time, figure out what that something means, and then find the context and other metrics, other parts of the story, other parts of the run, other things about the runner to understand what this metric really is truly telling you. So that's cadence. Okay, the next metric I want to talk about is heart rate. This is another one, personally, I don't spend a lot of time with for a couple of reasons. One, I don't have a heart rate monitor. I just recently started running with a watch that can give me my heart rate. But here's the thing, and I'll get to some of the benefits of heart rate in a second, but I want to just couch that in a few things that lead to heart rate variability, which is super important. Your fitness is going to play a part in your heart rate. The type of run you're doing is going to play a part in your heart rate. The terrain you're running on is going to play a part in your heart rate. So if you're running a recovery run on a flat surface, okay, there's going to be a heart rate associated with that, right? Well, if you do the same distance, the same pace, or I should say the same effort, on a very undulating course, lots of ups, lots of downs, with a footing that is suspect, your heart rate's going to be different. It's the same run. More or less, it's the same effort. But the heart rate's not going to say that. The heart rate's going to have way more variability on a run like that. Something to think about. Weather is going to play a part when it comes to heart rate. Hot and humid weather is going to have a different heart rate associated with it than a run done in mild or cool weather. Elevation, that's another thing that's going to play a part. Stress, dehydration, these are all things that can play a role in heart rate variability when you're going for a run. It's really important, just like those other metrics I've been talking about, to look at the number, but then bring in context to what that number is showing, or maybe a better way of putting it is, why is my heart rate higher today on, comparably speaking, an easier run than yesterday's harder run? Why is that? Well, like I said, it could be stress that you're having in your life. It could be a spike in the humidity and the heat in the location that you're at. There's all sorts of things. It could be a poor sleep. Poor sleep has shown up as a spike in heart rate. So remember, when you're using heart rate for training, something that I'm just going to say right off the bat, I don't do. Remember, you have to have context in there when you're looking at it. And consistency is super important. If you're going to use heart rate, consistently use it, all right? Pay attention to it. Document it, because it doesn't make sense to use heart rate on Tuesday, January 26th, and then not pay attention to it until February 17th and try to draw conclusions from it, all right? Now, heart rate, if you're using it consistently, it can be a great measurement of intensity. It can be a great measurement of your fitness. It can be a great measurement of your heart health, your cardiovascular strength. So there's a lot of good that heart rate can do for you if you're using it consistently. If it's just like anything else that's good in life. If it's done inconsistently, you're negating most of the positive effects, if not all of the positive effects. So, haphazardly using heart rate doesn't really help anybody. So just something to think about. But it is a metric. It is a metric that matters to some people, and it matters most if you're using it consistently. All right? Another metric that we can use are personal bests. Personal bests, I think, are a great metric to use. And for many people, when they first start out in the sport, it's like the gift that keeps on giving. If you've never run before, if you just start running consistently and keep showing up at starting lines, you're going to run through a series of personal bests. That first time you race a 1,500, 5K, 3K, the first time you do the loop around the block, these are all personal bests. You've never done them that well before. And if you consistently show up, guess what? You're going to probably knock out some more personal bests. Now, here's something to always remember. The fact that the better you get, the harder it gets to get better. So personal bests are a wonderful metric to use. You just have to understand that if by personal best what you mean is the fastest time I've recorded for this event, like all other metrics, you need to bring in context, okay? I'm going to use cross country as an example. It's a pet peeve of mine. It bothers me so much. It shouldn't bother me this much, but I think it bothers me this much because I know that it robs kids of celebrating certain successes they have during a season because of the way that they measure personal best in cross country. Cross country courses are all different. You can have flat ones, you can have hilly ones, you can have ones that have patches of sand, mud, other ones that are pancake flat, and part of the course is on concrete or through parking lots. It's the diversity out there in cross-country courses is extreme, which is why when a kid runs their 5K and it's on a pancake flat course and they run 1940 and that's their first time under 20 and they're psyched and they're celebrating, all for it. Great. You've never gone under 20. Then they do that course that's incredibly hilly and muddy, and they run 20:01. And I'll tell you what, that's a better performance than the 1940. But since they're marrying success with time instead of the course and time, well, now we have a problem because you're robbing that kid of celebrating what was their best race they've ever had. So just remember, when you're setting personal bests, yes, how fast or how little time you took to run that distance is one way of measuring a personal best. But there are lots of different personal bests. You can have a personal best, if we're using cross country as an example, on different courses. You can have a personal best race or run because you were the grittiest you've ever been, or you had a personal best run because it was the least self-sabotage you had on a run, meaning the self-talk was the most supportive it's ever been. Or maybe you have a personal best because this was your longest run, and you can measure it by distance or duration. Maybe it's your personal best because this was the hilliest run you ever had. Maybe it was just the best long run you've ever had. And by best long run, you can define that any way you want. The strongest you ever felt, the easiest it ever felt, the best you ever finished a long run, the most intelligently you ever started a long run, the best you ever fueled a long run. There are so many personal bests. I'm not going to say that personal best is my favorite metric, but it probably is because of how wide-ranging that metric can be, how diverse that metric can be. So I know it's not as, locked down as, the longest run I ever went was 100 minutes long, or the furthest I've ever run was 21K. I get it. But that's where it's fun. Like, how many different personal bests can you imagine? And I'll tell you what, it's a fun exercise, especially if you're a coach. And here's the thing, eventually you should become your own best coach. So that's kind of my tricky way of saying you should do this. Write down as many different personal bests as you can. As many different ways you could say that was the best I ever did this. Because if you're a coach, you can throw this at your athletes at practice. Hey, guess what, everybody? I know it was cold. I know it was rainy. That's the best we've ever run as a group in bad conditions. Any chance to celebrate progression is a chance you need to take. So look at personal bests as a metric that matters. Another one is fun. I try to bring this up a lot, and it's part of it is because I feel like I'm battling more and more people out there that are espousing this ideology that, if you're not running hard, then you're hardly running at all, or if you're having fun, then you're not being serious enough, which is all just malarkey. It's such garbage. It's such crap, and it's holding people back from being as good as they could possibly be. This mentality that it's always supposed to basically suck. I'll tell you what, sometimes it's going to suck. That doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, but if it always sucks, then you're doing something wrong. So use fun as a metric. And listen, I've told you before that when I say fun, it doesn't mean that, on the 7th of 8 800-meter intervals in February in the sleet, and you forgot gloves, is going to be like a laugh riot. The point is, if you can take a moment to realize how ridiculous it is to be doing 8 by 800 at 5K pace in the sleet in February on a track at 6 p.m. at night alone with a headlamp on, well, I think you're going to see that there is a little bit of fun there because it's nuts. It's bonkers, which means you're berserk, and that's kind of fun. So just remember that fun is a great metric, especially the harder the goal that you're taking on. You should make sure that the tougher the challenge, the more fun it is. And this is a little coaching wisdom for you. If you want a team to achieve great success, they're going to have to work really hard. And if you can make the hard work fun, it doesn't negate the hard work that's done. That's another one I just came up with. I'm probably going to listen to this myself so I can just hear that again because that's a good one. So let fun be one of those metrics you use when you're measuring success in your running or your coaching. Okay, the last one is a question. It's the most important question a coach can ask an athlete. So if you've run with me before, if you've listened to the podcast, if you've read anything I've written about coaching, you know what the question is. And the question is, how do you feel? That's not only the most important question you can ask an athlete, it's also the most important metric. How are you feeling? You stressed? You tired? You frustrated? You pissed off? You happy? You sad? You fired up? You excited? You full of energy? Are you just brimming with joy? How are you feeling? Not just because this is going to play a part in how we coach you and how we either maintain what we're doing or adjust what we're doing, push forward, pull back. We're going to adjust the training plan based on the answer to that question. But remember, the metric, the most important metric that you're going to want to pay attention to with your running is your running helping. Not just help you go further or go faster. Is running helping you become a better version of yourself? Is running making you happier? Is running making you more confident? Is running making you feel more powerful? Is running making you more wholly you? WHOLY. Wholly you. Do you feel like you are becoming who you want to be? Is running helping you be who you want to be? Are you who you want to be when you're running? Oh, baby, that's the most important metric. Because if running is helping you become more confident, if running is helping you become more happy, if running is helping you feel more powerful and more wholly you, you are going to be running better. How do I know that? Well, just answer any of those questions in the negative, and you tell me if you can run your best when you are not answering those questions in the affirmative. Yeah, I'm right. It's not complicated. Running isn't complicated. Runners are complicated, but this sport is not complicated. These metrics help us, hopefully, uncomplicate our progression in the sport. The key is, though, to make sure we're not just relying on a metric or what we think the metric may be saying. You need to dive deeper. You need to give it more time. You need to understand context. You need to know the story behind those numbers if you really, truly want to be measuring success, if you truly want to know what those metrics that matter mean. So, hopefully, this helps. Hopefully, this clears up a few things, and hopefully, it gives you more ways to measure success, the success of your running, and in doing so, the success of the runner. Okay? That's it. That's episode 87 right there. So let me first say thank you for listening. I had a great time. I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to leave a rating or review. And if you're not already a follower or subscriber to the podcast, well, you know what to do. Follow the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends and your family. And lastly, here we are, towards the end of January, let me just remind you that Best Runner Ever Winter Edition, that's right, month-long group program with Coach Bennett the Greater. That's Tammy Bennett of Show Up Society and myself. We're going to be running it starting it on February 1st. Make sure you're signed up. This is one of my favorite things of the year. We get a great group of people together. We make sure that you have your best winter of running ever. We have a wonderful online community. There's some private podcasts. There's some private online groups that you can be a part of and be sharing your wins, your losses, your struggles, the barriers you're breaking through. We've got 2 calls a week, which are fantastic. So it's just great. There's more details. There's more you can get out of it. Just check the show notes. Click on the link. It's going to take you to the Show Up Society website page, and there will be there in the menu BRE. Click on that for all the details, registration info. We want you to be a part and not apart from Best Runner Ever Winter Edition. So check that out. We hope to see you there. And until next time, which will be episode 88, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and I'll meet you on the next starting line. Thank you so much for listening to Coach Bennett's podcast today. And if you haven't already subscribed or set yourself as a follower to the podcast, I really hope you would. And make sure you check out the show notes, because in those show notes, you're going to find a link to Coach Bennett's newsletter and all the social media sites I'm on, like Instagram and Threads and Cameo and Blue Sky and Nope, not on that one anymore. So all the ones I am on, you're going to find it in the show notes, so check that out as well. And as always, thank you again for listening to Coach Bennett's podcast. Until next time, you keep taking care of yourself and each other.